Well, it's recording now. I guess it didn't take the first time. Okay, to recap what I said in a summation. Verse 8, he ends with the phrase, bond or free. Americans live off of freedom. We do everything predicated on being free. The old world's economic structure was predicated on slavery. That was how their economic success was done. When the Lord asked people to stay in their slavery, but asked them to change their attitude to serving Him, He was trying to get them to see that He now was their boss. The transference from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light, from God of this world to the kingdoms of our Lord, is a spiritual transference. But after the flesh, slavery still exists. It's part of the economic structure. He admits that there are bond and free. He didn't say, I like bond and I like free. What he said was, here's the order of things right now. Stay within your orders, because just because you became a Christian doesn't give you the right to now turn around and, as it were, machete your boss. The Civil War, I started to mention about the Civil War. The Civil War was a fight over the issue of economic prosperity, as much as it was a political fight and an ideological fight. Because slavery cut your costs. Put it to your modern vernacular, having volunteers is great for the church. If we have to pay everybody in the church to do everything that needs to be done, the church would fold. So we allow volunteering. Now the advantage is we are free people volunteering. But the net effect of economic structure is the same. Zero cost. In this old world, God has still got to work this old order into the next order. And so rather than having a bunch of Christians who just all of a sudden all over the region, the Mediterranean region, start becoming anarchists, I don't have to obey you anymore, I obey the Lord, bless God. Which would create absolute havoc, destroy opportunity for the testimony, because now we got a bunch of criminals running loose, and the world's going to look at those Christians as nothing but a bunch of criminals running loose. Okay, you think persecution of Christians was hard for doing good. Imagine what persecution of Christians would have been like if in the day they'd done evil. If they'd have just chucked the whole system. See, in America, we're used to picketing, we're used to going on million-man marches. You know, we have the right of peaceable redress. Keyword, peaceable. Deck one of the cops standing nearby and it becomes unpeaceable and we all end up with tear gas. Right? Mm-hmm. But in this scenario, see, in the old world, they don't have the same ideological position of freedom that we do. So he says, now realize, if you're free, whatever you're doing it under the Lord. If you're in bondage, whatever you're doing it under the Lord. I don't care whether you're a private entrepreneur or whether you're a, what would you call that, a doulos entrepreneur. I'm kidding a little. Whether or not you're a slave or you're a free agent, you still better do it unto me. Don't do it as a man-pleaser. Don't do it as a caring what men think person. Because this is what the scribes and the Pharisees did. They did everything for their image. Obedience that's only done for sake of image and to gain people's favor is not in heart true obedience. True obedience unto the Lord says, I'm doing this unto the Lord, and whether you like it or not, this is what's right. I look down history and see how many revolutions there were and revolts there were. And you say, my goodness, how the world goes from one kind of condition to another. how God is able to put kings up and take kings down. He allows an awful lot of rebellion to be at the basis of that. Yet, to his own people, he says, here's what I want you to do. Work within the system. If you can't work within the system, leave. He never anywhere ever says overthrow it. If enough people walk out of the system and start a new system, then the responsibility starts falling upon those who have the old system to either come in line or be eradicated by the Lord, not by the people of the new system. That's why America is such a remarkable country in that regard. The Puritans didn't rise up and decide, that's it, we're tired of King so-and-so and we're going to just tear his temples down. They said, bye-bye, nice to knowing you. And they headed off to another land for freedom. And God, looking at that, said, yep, works for me. Besides that, their sins have come to a full. And that land is going to become yours now. And we look at that and go, oh no, we conquered the Indians. The Indians had run out. What was the chance of salvation? A lot of Indians came in. A lot of Indians got saved because of this new nation that God was beginning to raise up from these settlers. And these settlers had enough spiritual bone in them to give the Indians a chance. That was the grace of God, in my opinion. I'm sorry, but I think it was the grace of God. So over here, out of this economic system in Europe, he brings out these people who are not necessarily all too better, but they're at least the next generation of the moves of God. And again, another move, and again, another move, and again, another move, and again, another move. Have you ever seen God ever in any of these moves of church history, and anything you do know, say to the Christians, I want you to tear down the structure? He always says, get inside of it. He never says, tear it down. The world right now is very worried about Christians coming into government. What? You afraid of us overturning your bondage? Christians have liberty. Christians have concepts and freedom concepts and perspectives on what's right and wrong that are predicated out of this book, which was originally what this country was partially founded on, was out of this book. So all we're doing is bringing us back to our grassroots. If you guys got bent so far out of course and your tree branches are going way over here to the left, we got to trim your tree branches so you realize where the root was, so we can grow the tree again. We're in a place where people are not always doing it unto the Lord or as the Lord would require. And therein we end up with some difficult movements going through church history, and even in our current history, of Christians thinking they're going to overthrow. Our warfare, as you're going to be reading about here in a little bit, is not against the rulers of this world, the world itself. It's real interesting. He goes through all of this obedience and don't be men pleasers and all that, and what we're going to hit right behind it is we wrestle not against flesh and blood. Those famous passages we love talking about so much and using as the platform for our spiritual warfare ministries, and yet it's all predicated on don't break the system, don't attack it. What are we attacking then? We're attacking the base of the system from the inside. We're going to go after the demons on the inside, and we're not going to attack the outside. This idea that some Christians have, that we're just waiting for the day when everything starts to fall apart. Because when it starts to fall apart, then the Christians will get to come up and set it right. Who appointed you doctor of society that you're going to set the bones of the nation? Ain't going to happen. Because they're going to know who you are before you get started. But they will not know who all the intercessors are hiding in the corners of rooms, and God taps every one of them because He's using them individually, and all of a sudden on June 17th at 5:42 in the nation of America, 200,000 intercessors went on alert for President X, And nobody knew about it. Because we're not disobedient to governments and civil authorities. We are not getting ready to overthrow the government. What we are going to do is overthrow the darkness. And if the souls who are tied to that darkness would like to get rid of their demons, great. We want them to. Because they're going to find out, as you and I have found out, that viewing life from that side of the wall of the gospel versus viewing life from this side of the wall of the gospel, your perspective changes practically overnight. Your awareness of things, light becomes dark, dark becomes light, flips back to the way it should be. So you got to imagine these slaves walking around, they've got light in their eyes now. Their whole system has changed. They've discovered liberty and freedom, and I can prophesy and I can do things, and doesn't that mean that I should step up to the plate? And the answer to that is not necessarily. Depends on how you step up to the plate. So I look at this and I see the Lord in just a matter of a few lines. He said, here's the social order. Here's what I want. Now, you're in it, but not of it. Remember who you work for, me. Even in the worst of scenarios, slavery. Verse 9, which is going to be my closing verse for this message. And ye masters, do the same things unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also in heaven is in heaven. Neither is there respect of persons with him. Now that is intriguing to me, because now we're talking about Christians who have slaves. Masters, just in case you think that what I just told you about slaves obeying you perfectly gives you license to do not right, I'm going to fix this right off the bat too. It's the same argument as fathers don't provoke your children to wrath. This is God in His understanding of how things relate. You can do this, but don't do that. And you can do this, but don't do that. And we've got to keep it in balance. I got to make sure you're 100% submitted, and I got to make sure you're 100% a nice guy. See, people fear dictatorships. But you fear a dictatorship because he's a bad king. You don't fear a good king who's looking out for the interest of his people, who's looking out for the interest of the kingdom and making sure it's secure and making sure it's safe, making sure the citizens are provided for. Nobody's going to revolt against a good king. Well, in likewise manner, we have slaves and masters. And God says to the masters, remember who you work for. He says, forbearing, threatening. Why did He throw that in there? I know why He threw that in there. For the same reason fathers don't get to provoke their children. Because if you are threatening a lot, if you are harsh, you're going to get a revolt. You're not allowed to be isolated from your workers. You're not allowed to be disconnected. There's souls involved. And so God, in His wisdom, sets up kind of a wheel within a wheel of ideas. And He says, I'm going to overturn this whole thing. But you're not going to get righteous government until Christ returns. So until Christ returns, here's what I need you to do. Be sheep. Be sheep. Just be sheep. Do that which is right. Do that which is good. Now, masters, be sheep. Do that which is right. Do that which is good. He says, knowing that your master also is in heaven. And that is probably the key that we need to hang on to the most. All of this argumentation, from 6:1 all the way through to here, we just got past husband and wife, we go through family, we go through economic structure, bringing it all up here to reminding us, point blank, We all have a master in heaven. Ultimately, we have a dad, that's why we obey dad. We have masters, that's why we obey the master. We have anointeds, and we obey the anointed. You know what I'm saying? He's our husband, yes. Everything that God does in the natural order actually does have a parallelism attitude in the spiritual order. And so the test becomes this. In the book of 1 John it says, how can you say you love God and hate your brother, who you have seen, God whom you've not seen? So putting it another way, how can you say that you are obedient unto God if you are rebelling against everything God set up? See, this becomes an issue, because Christians will go, I'm only doing what the Lord told me to do, and I don't have to pay any attention to you whatsoever. Okay? Sooner or later, that attitude's going to end up with you in front of a cop or a judge or a... Now, there is a place to say, better to obey God than men. Whether it is better to obey God than men, you decide. But as for me and my house, we're obeying the Lord. And that is not revolt. You remember, the definition comes from God. If you are obeying the chain of command correctly, that is not revolt. It is going to the higher authority, what we would call the higher power. If a lieutenant tells a captain something to do, and the captain suspects that it's in violation of military directive, and he goes to a general to say, I have a problem with this, is he out of order? The answer is both yes and no. Because what he's supposed to do is he's supposed to go to his commanding officer, who gave him the order, and say, I have a problem with this, but I'm under obedience. Now what do you do? Well, when you look at what God set up structure-wise, we go to God, who is the highest authority. And if you're not going to God on occasion to make sure that the alignments are right, there are people who are probably in the way of your life from God's point of view in the natural order. They're actually hindering the flow of God. Do you have the right to go before God and say, you know, I've got a blockage here? Now, either that blockage needs to start hearing your voice, or that blockage has to get out of the way, because that blockage is in the way of the will of the Lord. That is appealing to a higher authority without being rebellious, without usurpation. So if we always consider that we have a master in heaven, and that we serve him, and that everybody underneath him is supposed to serve him, then we have the right to go before his throne and make these requests. But remember something, he says, neither is there respect of persons with him. See, masters are going to have a tough time with that. If you've been a slave owner, you're used to people cowering to your presence. They're going to show up a little on the fearful side. And there's a tendency then to be respect of persons. Well, God's no respect of persons. He's not going to say, well, that's President so-and-so, and because he's the president, I'm going to respect him above Brother John over here who's making a request. It doesn't work that way. God will look at the request, check his own will, and determine what the right answer is for any given action. So, masters, realize that God is not a respecter of persons. He ain't looking at your titles. I'm slave owner over 500 slaves. Bless God. I'm a Christian with 500 slaves. God is not going to answer your prayers better because you're a master over 500 and he's a master over 50. And he certainly isn't going to answer your prayers more because you're not the slave. And that's the issue. A slave who's in the right attitude could be light years ahead than the master who's in the wrong attitude. And they're both Christian. They're both saved. See? And that makes a difference. When you understand that God's point of view on authority is not, what's the word I'm looking for? It's not haphazard. I don't have the right word for it, but it's not haphazard. He didn't just set this all up because it sounded good to him. He set it all up because there's cursings and blessings attached to the correct flow within that authority structure. And that's why when you get to verse 11 and following, he comes back from all of this natural order stuff, getting the attitudes right first, and then comes back and says, now let's talk about spiritual warfare. What I find is a lot of people are talking about spiritual warfare, but they're not addressing these other authority lines to realize they link together. The spiritual warfare works for the guy who's following this other stuff. The spiritual warfare is probably not going to be as effective to the person whose attitude is rebellion, disobedience, dishonoring, oppositional, and says, well, bless God because I know you're evil. I'm going to attack your Yeah. Go ahead, try to attack his principality and see what happens. Say, your spiritual warfare has to be predicated on you first being in the right frame of authority. Now, if you're an Elijah and you're 100% submitted to God, and God says, hey, I got the task for you to do, you're probably going to do some pretty strange things. But if you're not an Elijah, and you're going to bank off of your Christian rights, and then you're going to go to the Lord and say, give me this mountain, and then you attack and you get your fanny whooped, you have no grounds to say to God, how come you didn't back me up? You said, we did this, we could do this. Because I guarantee you, when you get in front of the white throne judgment, he's going to go, well, what I don't understand here is, why did you think I'd help you in that circumstance? I mean, didn't I say to you, stay submitted? Didn't I say to you, keep a humble heart? Didn't I say to you, forgive all men so that I can forgive you? Didn't I say to you? So why are you attacking me because I couldn't come rescue you in your spiritual warfare battle because you didn't give the other part? You had the glycerin, you didn't have the nitro. And you wonder why it didn't go boom. It went splat. See? So I'm just saying, I look through this Ephesians thing and I see God sprinkling. Here's the spiritual principle, here's the natural things you got to watch out for. Here's the spiritual principle, here's the natural thing. Here's the spiritual. And it's all intended to balance your walk out so that you're not too tilted to the one side, not too tilted to the other side. Love your enemies. Is that not a commandment? Yet, here we know we're coming up on attack powers and principalities. Well, then I obviously have to love my enemies and serve and do whatever I got to do while keeping a good attitude so that when I go to do my spiritual warfare, it's effective. Otherwise, I'm likely to get my fanny whooped for pride, arrogance, haughtiness, out of station, as it were, of life, and I won't see the blessings I'm looking for. So, realize that Ephesians gives us a natural, spiritual, with a hyphen between it, relationship, so that we can say, this is effective Christianity. Next time around, we'll go through the finally, my brethren, be strong in the Lord and in the power of His might. And go back to those really super positive verses instead of those course correction verses. But realize God is just very, very clever. He's very, very smart. And He's got this whole order of things that we can't even see the big picture for. And so we're doing these obediences simply because He wants us to. But we don't oftentimes step back far enough or high enough to look down to say, why would He do that? Why would He do that? Why would He want that? And when you start to ask that question, you start seeing those interrelationships. And you realize God is busily working. to change the order, to change people, to change the devil's influence. But he has to do it with human beings who have active wills, which means he has to maneuver it. He's got to course correct it. He can't just bomb it every single time. And we as Christians have a really good opportunity to be lights. And I don't mean just witnesses. I mean lights, where we can say with all integrity, I do this unto the Lord. And now, devil, I'm coming after you. And you don't end up with an attitude of superiority or an attitude of haughtiness, because you're keeping your humility in relationship between you and your common man, while at the same time keeping your position of sitting on a throne in the heavenlies to do what's right. And that's called balance. And I think that's a far better balance than what some people are proposing, either to the one way or the other. You know, the too much yielded and not enough fight the devil, or the too much fight the devil and not enough yielded. So, take to heart the balancing effect of the Lord and let him balance you out. And keep doing good works. Do your good works. Let your Father shine through you. They will see your good works. They will reward you, and they will bless God in the long run for what you've done, whether you be slave or free. I'll say one thing, I'm real grateful I'm free, but I am employed, so I will always be aware of my freedom is partially limited. But in God, my freedom is 100%. Never forget that. You're 100% free in God. Thank you, Jesus, for this message. We ask, Lord, that you would use it to your advantage whenever and wherever you can. Amen.